Appreciate everybody joining as always. Another one of our, what's looking like every few weeks, we're hosting a webinar. So our second one in April. Happy Earth Day. If you joined, you probably read the caption that we're going to focus on ESG, specifically carbon emissions tracking, and how it's applicable to container lifecycle management. It should be much more limited in scope compared to the previous webinars, probably 20 to 30 minutes tops today as we do a deeper dive into the specific product, and we'll be rolling more of these out as there's been really good feedback of wanting to go deeper into the specific products. This is somewhat of a new product for us, and we'll kind of talk through the philosophy of why it made sense for us to this within the platform. We'll get into all that. So thank you again to everybody joining, and we'll jump right in. To the folks I know, good to see you. The folks I don't, I'm Michael Rentz. I'm the CRO here at Gnosis. Been here 6 years, pretty much since the beginning, and spend most of my time talking to our customers and to folks in the market. And we're joined today by Ray Boaz, who's our VP of Engineering, who's built a lot of this product and has leaned into being a domain expert. And so it'll be easy for me to pass the mic to him when it goes deep into the weeds. But we're going to walk through a few slides and then jump into the product, which I know most people like to spend time in the product, and Ray will show you what we built and how it can be seamlessly bolted onto CLM. Ray, do you want to say anything before we get started?
Yeah, it's a cool product that basically is derived from product. So by just using the lifecycle management and the tracking data, it makes it very easy for us to go ahead and do this audit on the carbon emissions tracking, and we'll explain kind of the details around how we're doing that.
Good deal. So we'll jump right in. And as always, if there's any questions, drop them in the chat. We don't mind being interrupted. We'll always reserve time at the end for additional Q&A, and this is being recorded, so we'll distribute it across all channels. And most importantly, if you want to learn more at the end, we're easy to get in touch with. You can drop it in the chat or reach out to us, and we'll find some time to talk deeper. So the plan today is just to talk generally about the emissions landscape, and why there is a blind spot, for the teams. As always, we take care of logistics teams first. And so, as I've mentioned on previous webinars, used to think a lot about what annoys the logistics team, started thinking more recently about who annoys the logistics team. And so they're often being asked to derive the carbon emissions footprint that they're responsible for. So it was a seamless extension for us since we had the underlying data. We'll jump into the Gnosis solution, why it is seamless. Again, as everybody probably knows at this point, we're fundamentally a data science company. Everything is built on our proprietary sovereign data, and it made it really easy to just put the GLEC framework on top of it to calculate very granularly exactly what your scope, your carbon emissions footprint is. And then three, and most importantly, how our BCO customers can use it, not limited to just BCO customers, obviously. If we abstract it out, it's a data science problem, but talking through some of the BCO use cases, real workflows, audit-ready exports, helping you see around corners and like why this information is important for your organization. So we'll keep moving through it. So as everybody knows, over the last 10 years, people have started to pay more attention to the carbon footprint. We know that, as if you look at ocean shipping or just container movements in general, the ocean haulage piece is a big contributor to that carbon emissions. And there was a big efficiency gain with the introduction of the container from a unit cost perspective, but those big vessels slow steaming across the ocean certainly contribute to the carbon emissions footprint. People are being held responsible for multiple different directions. Obviously, the pubcos, publicly traded companies, report on this. It's important to their customers, to their internal profile, things like that. Additionally, though, a lot of the vendors, whether it's the carriers themselves or whoever it may be, compete on having a limited or a smaller carbon footprint. So being able to actually have visibility into that and making sure you're getting what you bargained for, and then ultimately helping you see around a corner where if two different bookings on that lane are exactly the same cost, same transit time, and if you wanted an additional view into like what's the carbon emissions footprint, being able to equip our customers to book and to utilize their network in that way. So as it says here, data is everywhere and nowhere. Classic problem for our logistics customers in that more data actually makes the problem worse. We've made a name for ourselves for putting the data in its most usable format. Fundamentally, that doesn't change for us. It's just the use case now is the carbon footprint. Compliance is complex. Regulations like SB 253 and EU CSRD demand audit-ready Scope 3 reporting with very little guidance on how to get there. It seems it was rather academic the last few years, a lot of different competing frameworks. There has been adoption specific to the GLEC framework. And so we decided to take a stab at it ourselves and follow what we thought was the most thorough and complete framework, and is again equipping our customers to be able to report on that. And then teams are under resourced, obviously. This is, we always say, like, helping Gnosis customers stop doing things that are not in their job description. Something like carbon emissions is way outside the scope of what people signed up to do in logistics. And so it's a natural segue for us to, give that time back to our customers to focus on, taking care of the expensive exceptions with the container movements in general, and things like reporting, especially something like carbon emissions reporting, is something that can easily be automated for us. That makes the logistics teams look like heroes, and makes the business operate better, and makes everybody happier. So that's kind of the framework. It says here, obviously, the shipping industry is the 6th largest carbon emitter. So doing everything we can to help, mitigate that impact and help everybody optimize that system together. So as always, I mean, this part of the story hasn't changed. Most BCOs track emissions with spreadsheets, estimated distances, and lane averages. That's a recurring theme, is like there's this idea of the flaw of averages. You don't really have granularity into specific lanes, definitely not to the container or SKU level, and definitely not, the complete container movement. And so much easier for us, since we're already doing this for our customers, to stitch that together very precisely. And these are the steps that are laid out. Ray, did you want to add anything based off the last slide or this on kind of the fundamentals to calculating this?
Yeah, one of the key differentiators, I think, for what we're doing is that we're using the actual vessel location data as opposed to average vessel distances per lane. We have a hierarchy of how we're looking at distances based off of the data that we have available, and so we'll talk more about that. But the ideal is getting as close to the ground truth of exactly what happened versus making assumptions on the distance traveled is a big factor. And that distance is really the overwhelming factor in what ultimately the emissions is for journeys of this length.
Yeah, and that's when we started looking at this a couple years ago. I think it was Jake and me back in the day. As you started to see the emergence of like third-party standalone emissions tracking companies, and they would need the data from companies like us in order to run their calculation. And once we looked at the calculation, it was like, oh, it's just, a very simple multi-factor linear analysis of like the actual impact. And it was much easier for us to sit that on top of our data. And as you can see here, the steps that we identified is you export the container list from the TMS or the 3PL, look up the average vessel distance per lane, apply a default emissions factor. That was the academic part that they had come up with on the framework. Build formulas in Excel, repeat for rail drayage separately, hand spreadsheet to auditing firm. And it's like in 2026, with the tooling we have and the data infrastructure we had, that was just unbelievably easy to automate. So keep going. I just want to get through a couple more slides before I turn it over to Ray to show you what it looks like in our platform. Yeah, and so like Ray mentioned, like the granularity of the data, already having like the holistic view of that for a variety of other use cases, not just carbon emissions, it was very easy for us. So we're going to leverage the container data already in the platform that's already there, using the actual AIS vessel route predicted in actual, the GLEC compliant emissions factor applied, pulling that directly from their studies, the whole container journey, not just ocean. We need zero IT help from you. We do everything on our end, and then give you the audit-ready export on demand. So if you're familiar with the platform, that should make perfect sense. If not, you're going to see what it looks like in a second. All right, Ray, you want to jump into the platform?
Yeah, we'll jump into a demo here. All right, so this is the Gnosis Valhalla portal. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is just kind of the landing page, can be configured in any way. These widgets here are based off of kind of interesting summary pieces of data that our customers might want to check just on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis. So we come in here and then we look at the carbon emissions dashboard specifically for what we're talking about. And similarly, we have these widgets up top, which can be configured however you like. We have some examples in here of what we think would be interesting overall summaries, the total emissions for last year, current year to date, average per container, total shipments that we're tracking. And then we have a link here to our sources and assumptions that I'll get to in just a minute. We also have our projected emissions for active containers, and that's one other thing that is maybe a differentiator here. Basically, we are predicting what the emissions are on every single container as soon as we get the tracking request from our customer. That lays out based off of an average or an expected journey distance. So we start out with a prediction based off of what we expect the route to be. However, once the container is discharged at the end of the journey, we recalculate the carbon emissions based off of the actual vessel tracking data associated with that container. So we give you an idea as soon as possible, and then we update that with the most realistic estimate or calculation possible once we have all the data stored. So that's something that maybe others aren't providing, but we're capable of doing because we get the container data earlier in the process.
And something Ray and I talked about this morning is like the next step or evolution of that, of helping you see around corners, is what I alluded to at the beginning of the call, which is if you have competitive bookings where there's no differentiation on transit time or cost, carbon emissions can be that of helping you forecast, what's going to limit that footprint. And so like that's not fully enabled yet. But as with everything at Gnosis, like as you work with our solutions engineers, if there's a different use case or a different way you want to see it, or your auditors or leadership want to see it, this is just the beginning, and happy to have a meeting of the minds to figure out what that collaboration and outcome could be for you. So if you have any ideas on that, please reach out. We're always looking forward to hearing how people want to use anything that we provide within the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the visuals you're seeing here, we've got the emissions by lane, and you can kind of drill into which containers are on an individual lane. You can sort it by the total emissions per lane here, Savannah, from wherever. These are all suggestions basically of how we think it might be interesting to look at this data. All of it is completely configurable based off of what your needs are. The underlying calculations are the kind of difficult part on our end, and creating all of those, we can then present it to you however you need it. And kind of going into the details here, each container has a line item, and within each line item, you have the piece of the journey. So you have the legs of the journey and the nodes of the journey, which if you're familiar with the GLEC kind of framework, each of those are calculated differently. So as we click into these, we can see the different ocean legs, what the distances were, what the mass of the container was, the total emissions for each of the legs. And then we can also do the same thing on the node side, depending here. You'll see the order, it jumps because there's actually kind of a second node at the transit shipment facility based off of how we calculate the handling on it, of the taking it off the vessel and then also putting it back onto the vessel. So with these, we're showing the total emissions. We show the journey nodes and the journey legs. We also have data on our assumptions and the sources for those assumptions. So like I said, we're going to use the vessel data for location and getting the distance as often as possible. In some cases, we won't have that, and we'll fall back to, based off of your container journey history, what is the most likely route that a container took. If we don't have history for you on that lane, we're going to fall back to a default route for that particular lane. And if for some reason we can't get a default route on a lane, then we're going to have as the crow flies, time some sort of factor. So we have kind of these cascading assumptions where we start as specific as possible based off of the data that's available to us. And so we do that with the ocean vessel distances. We do that with the rail distances. We look at the specific rail route based off of the rail carrier that is taking it, because sometimes they're using different routes depending on which railways they have access to. And then also for drayage, we're pulling truck-specific routing for the drayage providers. So in each of those cases, we have fallbacks if for some reason we don't have data immediately available. And similarly with the weight, ideally we're getting the exact weight from you, the customer. You're sharing that with us as you're giving us information about the customer. If not, we get it from our steamship line tracking, and we use the weight that we have there. If for some reason they don't provide it, we fall back to an assumption there. But we tell you in all cases where we are getting the data. So did we have to fall back to an assumption on any individual container or journey so that you have access to that?
Good deal. And did you want to jump over to some of the additional visualizations?
Yeah, one other view of this is basically this is your entire network, and the color is basically green, not that much carbon emissions, red, a lot of carbon emissions. Obviously, a lot of that's driven by the volume. You can kind of filter this down based off of the volume that you have on any given lane. Blue is basically nothing. You can see at the nodes where you have the most emissions as well. We can click into a lane, see individual containers, and then we can see the actual nodes and journey legs on the container and what the emissions are on each of them. So again, this is kind of a default overview of your network and where the emissions are coming from as kind of a quick reference, but this is something that can be configured as well. And we would love feedback as people start to use the product more on what the best way of presenting this is to you. And maybe that's different from customer to customer, and we're happy to customize with that.
Yeah, no, good deal. And this, if you paid attention to how Ray was navigating the bar, there was a carbon emissions tab, and then also an analytics, and some of that we're looking at right now sits in the advanced analytics. And we've gone through some of that with benchmarking, transit time analysis, port statistics, et cetera. So really working a lot on new products on some of these really compelling visualizations that hopefully, help everybody negotiate better partnerships with their different carrier partners or whoever it may be. We started out, trying to help our customers save money on asset-based late fees, D&D, but realizing that a majority of the P&L, typically 80%, is taken up by the ocean freight rate contracts. And so equipping our customers to make sure they're getting what they bargained for. And if they have room to negotiate 1, 2, 3 better percent rates, that's going to save more than anything that we could do on asset-based late fees. So whether it's transit time analysis, cost benchmarking, or carbon emissions, we know that certain carriers are advocating their carbon footprints and making it a part of the contract. We want to give our customers visibility into that as well, to hold them accountable and to making sure they get what they bargained for. So that's really it. Anything else, Ray, you wanted to touch on the platform?
No, I think that we've gone over what we have built out today, but I just emphasize that as we get feedback and as your needs kind of come to us, we are very flexible in presenting this differently. Of course, any of those tables are exportable, or you can create them using a report builder so that they are automatically sent on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Those are all things that are native to the platform for any type of data that we have in here. It's really just applying that to the carbon emissions data that we're presenting today.
Good deal. Well, we'll jump over to see if there's any questions. I know we have a Q&A tab or a chat tab. I'm not seeing any questions. We'll wait a little bit to see if there are. We appreciate everybody joining. As mentioned, this one's a bit more limited in scope than the ones we've done previously, but right on time at about 20 minutes in. So we'll pause to see if there's any questions. Make sure I'm not missing anything. I don't see any questions, so good job, Ray. Really concise. It should be really simple on its face. I think it makes sense from a narrative perspective for Gnosis, in that we have the underlying data. and just equipping our teams for different types of visibility. For this case, obviously the carbon emissions. And as Ray mentioned, not limited to that, not limited to what we just showed you, a lot of different ways we can configure this, for our customers. So if you have any questions, please reach out. We will follow up with everybody, make sure this is distributed. We have some additional webinars coming up. So please pay attention, and we'll do our best to notify everybody of that. But again, not seeing any questions. So with that, Ray, do you have anything else? And then we'll close this out.
No, nothing else from my end at this time. Happy to answer any questions if people are interested in kind of the nitty gritty of how it's being put together. But as Michael said, maybe this is a really nice thing to be just taken off your plate and something you don't have to deal with. And we've dug into all the details to make sure that it can be audited correctly.
There you go. That's right. Really good way to articulate it and close this out. So thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch. If you have any additional questions, please reach out. As always, the team's ready to answer any questions and show you what this could look like, for your platform. Or if you're a new customer, we'll show you everything. So thank y'all. Happy Earth Day, and we will talk to everybody soon. Oh, we did get one question. What's the first step for an SN organization starting ESG tracking if they're already used containerized infrastructure? For Gnosis, what's the first step for an organization starting ESG tracking?
Yeah, if you are already using Gnosis, it is basically a phone call to us. We can coordinate with you and we can get you set up. There are a few configurations that we would want to make sure that we're aligned with you on as far as how the calculations are done, but that's something that we'd be able to knock out in a phone call and then execute for you. And then it's a matter of, it would be available in your platform in Gnosis, and really discussions on how you want it presented to you. So what changes from that kind of default view that we just saw would you like to see?
Yeah, so almost a flip of a switch if you're already a Gnosis customer. If you're not a Gnosis customer, as always, it's really lightweight. For a majority of the container's lifecycle, we just need the MBL and container pair, and you're off and running. But anything pre-MBL origin side or specific to a Dre move, we would have to further explore there, but we should have pretty good visibility into that as well, just with the MBL and container pair. So great question, really easy. It's really just add water at this point for us, but I appreciate the question. Any other questions? Yep. Can we please reach you? Yeah. Yep. There's another one. How can we book a demo to know more? Whom to reach out? Anybody. You can reach out to myself or Ray, and there should be we'll follow up with you, Steve, after this. Heather's going to grab the link and drop it in the chat right now. There you go. Ray just dropped his email as well. Just shoot us a note. We have plenty of intake forms, and we'll follow up with you. We're paying attention to the chat, but that shouldn't be hard, Steve. There you go. And Heather just dropped.
As far as feedback from the customer, I'd say that the main thing is that it's been able to basically distill this long, kind of complicated process into an export. Like that's really how our customers are using it today, is they need to export the entire carbon emissions journey process in an auditable format to be able to hand off. And so that is very easy from what we just saw in the front end there to basically export to an Excel doc. But of course, if there are other ways that you're wanting to track it, we're able to work with you on that. And as Michael mentioned, one of the things that is kind of a next step for us and not far in the future is adding some configurability so that you can optimize your own route. You can look for maybe gaps or inefficiencies in your process where you might be able to save some carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, a couple more questions, Ray. How does Gnosis handle data gaps or uncertainties in carbon emissions tracking across complex multimodal supply chains? I think you touched on that earlier about like defaulting to the baseline assumptions at certain legs or nodes. So maybe talk us back through.
Yeah, and so basically the three key factors that go into any of these calculations is distance, weight, and emissions factor. The emissions factors we get from the GLEC framework, we can get as specific as the input data on the vessel and the type of equipment that's being used to use the most specific factor as possible. Really, the default factor is kind of a standard at this point. A lot of people are comfortable using that, but again, we can get as specific as you're able to provide data on. For the vessel distance or any of the journey leg distances, like I said, we're using our tracking data from our AIS satellite data tracking the vessels to get actual journey data. If for some reason we don't have that, so getting at the data gaps, we have fallbacks for each of those. So we have basically 4 tiers of fallbacks for the ocean route, 2 or 3 tiers on the rail and the drayage route. So if you can give us an origin and a destination, we can get you a calculation. And like I said, in the audit, it will show you what level of precision and confidence we have on any piece of that calculation. So we'll get you an answer, but we'll also present you with how confident that answer is and exactly what assumptions were made with it.
Yeah, great answer. Another couple questions. How customizable are the reports for different stakeholders? As always, I mean, that's not limited to just carbon emissions, like extremely customizable. So a few different out-of-the-box features, our report builder, which sits on our live data feed that you can configure cadenced outbound emails of spreadsheets effectively, Excel files, where you control, the table and the filter itself, and then event-driven notifications, whether it's proactive based off of when an ETA change, you set that criteria, and that can be pushed via webhook, API, or email. So very customizable with regards to how we get the data and the visualizations into people's hands. That part is super easy. Another question is, how can companies effectively align their freight emissions tracking with global ESG reporting frameworks? I mean, that's kind of what we've done for you, is we've taken what seems to be the most widely adopted framework, the GLEC framework, and just set that on top of our tracking data. So, and then whatever specific reporting, whether it's by region with the EU or whatever regulatory agency that you're responsible for, could be by commodity or by geography, whatever it is, that's easy for us to align that criteria and help your organization kind of fit with whatever those regulations are.
I see a question about machine learning or predictive analytics. So ideally, we don't have to use any of that because we're getting the direct data from the AIS location data. We have the exact rail route. We have the exact drayage route. So that's our best case. So when we are using predictive analytics and machine learning models is basically when we have to make an assumption on what the route is or what the vessel location is. So we look at your own vessel history for your containers and what is the most likely route, which that does involve some modeling and some historical analytics on top of it, as well as potentially if the weight is not provided by the steamship line, we're able to look historically at what your typical container weights are and model out what we think a good assumption would be. Again, we would tell you that we're making those assumptions and that these are not exact data points in the audit so that you be able to present when you're going through it. We don't want to present something to you as 100% ground truth when it is not.
Yeah, some more questions rolling in. What's one ESG metric that companies often overlook but should prioritize? I'm not saying I don't think it's necessarily a metric per se, but just like the granularity of it. So the fact that one, you have visibility into your network's carbon footprint. A lot of the times, especially for the BCO customers, they just don't have the time or the capability to calculate that. Now they do. And that bleeds into the second question, which is, in our experience, how does improved carbon tracking translate into actual operational or cost efficiencies for logistics companies? I think a lot of carriers market, an increase in premium or rate or service or one or the other, and the fact that it is lower carbon emissions. And from our conversations with our customers, they had no visibility into if that was true or not. So I think it gives you better posture to make sure you're getting what you bargained for. And then whatever your reporting constraints are, again, kind of by a regulatory environment, especially if you're publicly traded, on what you commit to, and if there's any excessive fees associated with, extending beyond whatever the tolerance would be. I think Another question, how do you see carbon tracking evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, especially with increasing regulatory pressure and digitalization in supply chains? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, honestly. I think that's what made it so seamless for us. It's still going to be an asset-based industry. At the end of the day, we move containers and metal boxes from point A to point B, and still dependent on, oil-based machinery effectively. So unless there's like an introduction of a green vessel or green equipment, like that's the only thing I think that would like actually reduce it in the next 5 to 10 years.
And honestly, at that point, like it still has a carbon impact. They're still going to have a factor associated with it. Hopefully, the factor goes down, and so maybe that allows you more flexibility. But the reality is, I think that regulation is only going to increase around it, and ideally, you have the visibility on where all these things are, and we have the capability of seamlessly turning that on, as Michael was mentioning, where it's just something that we take care of in the background that you guys don't have to think about is the goal.
Good deal. Okay, for the sake of time, we're gonna transition out of the webinar. Wanted to be mindful of everyone's time. For any questions we did not get to, we will follow up directly with those folks with the questions. I think we covered a lot. 2 announcements. We do have a top 12 BCO importer customer that has had an incredible business impact with carbon emissions. As with everything at Gnosis, we typically pilot new products, for lack of a better phrase, with existing customers. We've seen a couple handfuls now implemented. It's very easy. It's literally just you can have insights in a day or two once you decide you want carbon emissions, and very easy for us to integrate with any system of record. As with everything, that's nothing new for us. So that's it for the carbon emissions Earth Day webinar. The announcement, our next webinar will be May 14th. I will be joined by our newest board member, Gary Adams, ex-Walmart Chief Supply Chain Officer, and Jim Newsom, ex-President and CEO of the South Carolina Ports Authority and first ever American President of Hapag-Lloyd Americas. I will be picking their brains on what to expect for 2026. And so a big honor for me to be joined by those 2 gentlemen to discuss everything that's happening in the macroeconomic and shipping world today. That'll be at 11 a.m. on the 14th. So please join that. I think that will be very, very rich in value. But thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Ray, and to all the questions that are still rolling in. We will follow up. And if you want to learn more, please reach out. But thank you all so much. Appreciate it.